Hello and welcome to today's Cybersecurity Summit Power Hour. My name is Rick. I will be in the background answering any WebEx technical questions. We have a few housekeeping items before we get started. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties joining the WebEx session, please submit a question using the Q&A panel. During the presentation, all participants will remain in listen-only mode. And as a reminder, this event is being recorded for rebroadcast. We'll be hosting a Q&A session at the conclusion of each of today's presentations. We encourage you to submit written questions at any time during the presentation using the Q&A panel at the bottom right of your screen. Please type your question into the text field and hit send. Please keep the drop-down as all panelists. With that, we invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy today's presentation. I would now like to introduce Bradford Rand, CEO of the Cybersecurity Summit. Bradford, you have the floor.
Great, thank you, Rick, and thank you everyone for joining us. This is our final Security Power Hour briefing for this region, and we will now start beginning our Cybersecurity Summits, our full-day, highly interactive cybersecurity summits, similar to the ones that we have done live, but of course now they'll be done virtually, at least until the beginning of 2021, and we invite you to join us. As a matter of fact, our first virtual one for the Southeast region, although anyone can join, will be July 28th. And we've got speakers there from over 25 top companies, as well as government organizations such as the Secret Service, FBI, and DHS and CISA. Today's webcast, again, is our final one for this region. If you join us for the entire day, you will receive a CPE credit in approximately 2 days. Most of the slides also will be shared also in about 2 days on cybersummitusa.com. And if you've got any questions, please put them in the Q&A box or the chat box, and we will try to get to as many as we can. And without further delay, let's bring on our keynote, Matt Chevreau. He's been with the U.S. Secret Service for over 21 years. So technically, he has just about seen it all. Matt, can you hear us?
I can hear you fine. Can you hear me, Bradford?
I can hear you perfectly. Matt, take it away. Thank you again for your service and for joining us.
Thank you, Bradford. Appreciate it. And thanks to everyone at Cyber Summit USA for inviting me to participate again today for your final session in this region. Again, my name is Matt Chevreau, and I run our cyber outreach section within the Criminal Investigative Division of the Secret Service here in Washington, D.C. As Bradford mentioned, I got over 21 years with the service. Most of that has been spent investigating cyber-related crime, with the exception of about 4.5, 5 years that was done in protection. I actually got my baptism, if you will, into cyber crime by starting out doing computer forensics. And it just kind of took off from there to encompass a bunch of different topics and different layers of cyber crime. So as we move through today, I'm going to focus on what we're seeing as far as criminal cyber activity right now. I say criminal because the Secret Service focuses mainly on crimes targeting our financial infrastructure and that are motivated by criminal financial gain. Our colleagues at the FBI have the expertise on the matters involving nation-state actors who are usually motivated by other causes such as intelligence gathering, espionage, cyber warfare, cases like that. But the service focuses on the criminal aspect of it mainly. When COVID hit here in the early part of this year, everybody, all law enforcement agencies saw a significant uptick in criminal activity as a result. I'll go over some of the COVID-19 themed schemes that we're seeing the most. We'll also talk a little bit about some of the crimes that we were seeing before COVID that have been adapted into COVID-themed schemes now, even before the pandemic, and we're going to continue to see them as we go forward from there. We're talking about things like ransomware and extortionware, business email compromise, e-skimming. Those are things that were going on even before. Now they're just using COVID as another theme to perpetrate the same kind of fraud. And then we'll talk a little bit about how to protect yourself a little bit from this, and some information sharing and resource items that I have as well. So when COVID hit early part of this year, it pretty much opened up, a Pandora's box for criminals. Criminals keep up with the current state of affairs that are going on, and they actively use hysteria and anxiety and all of the urgency and stuff that is related with the pandemic to try and defraud you. They read the same security journals, they visit the same websites as all the security folks, the IT security folks. They read the vulnerability reports. So they're already doing that stuff. COVID hits, and now they have a new theme that they can go ahead and try and put together schemes to steal money, steal PII, steal personal health information, anything that they can use to make money off of it. They exploit the pandemic to target unsuspecting victims. They basically are preying upon people's fears, the uncertainty, and the circumstances that everybody's forced into to elicit illegal funds. Not to mention when the government dangles a $3 trillion with a T, $3 trillion carrot in front of them, they're going to do everything and anything they can to get their piece of that. From all of the different pots of money that the government has now made available, to help people, the criminals are going after it just the same. We're also seeing, an increase in e-skimming. Everybody's working remotely right now, so people are using their credit cards more. So when they're online more, shopping more with their credit cards, they're targeting those websites. They're exploiting the vulnerabilities in the payment platforms for the businesses that haven't upgraded them and plug some of those vulnerabilities. They're using those also to steal your credit card information, your PII information, anything they can that they can sell, on the dark web and other websites to make a buck off of you. And then on top of that, social engineering is at an all-time high. They're using all tactics that they can because they're not seeing people face-to-face anymore. Everything is being done primarily. A lot of it's being done over the internet. Even as we kind of drift back into some sort of normalcy with going out to restaurants and things like that, people are still, for a majority, are still resulting back to a lot of the social distancing and purchasing stuff online and so it gives the opportunity to the criminals to exploit that even further. Just remember, this stuff was going on before COVID-19, and they're still going to use other themes that aren't COVID related to try and exploit you. Everyone's a target, and don't ever think that anybody is too small or an organization is too large. So some of the things that we're seeing, and it's not really new tactics or anything. They're just, again, they're adapting it to what's going on right now. They're using phishing just as they always would, and they're using more and more. We're seeing a significant uptick in what's called smishing, which is basically phishing through the SMS texting system. Your iMessage, your SMS texting on your Android phones. I don't know about you, but I'm getting text messages from organizations and stuff that I've never had anything to do with. So, numbers are floating around there. People are trying it. All they need is just one person out of 1,000, to click on it, and they're off to the races from there. If you fall victim to them, you can fall victim in two different ways. One, if you click on it, you're letting them know it's a live number. If you answer the text, that is, or even the phishing email, you're letting them know it's, they've got a good contact in there. On top of it, if you answer them and try to do business with them, you risk one, providing them with information that they can use to PII or payment card information or anything like that. If you're to buy something, you risk giving them that information. And then on top of that, they may not even follow through with it and get you what you want, or they could be selling you fraudulent stuff. Some of the pretexts that I have listed up there, personal protective equipment, stimulus payment emails and SMS texts, charity-related scams, non-delivery. That's where you order something from somebody and they just never send it to you. They take your money and they never send you anything. Testing kit information. Even though test kits are, testing is very widely available now. There's still folks who don't want to go out and do it, so they order them. This was something we saw more early on, but we've got cases that are open right now regarding fraudulent test kits. Where people in the early months of COVID were selling fraudulent test kits. Stimulus check fraud. Again, all that money the government's made available to everybody. There is just another carrot, like I said, that's being dangled in front of a criminal to try and steal from you. Big thing that's happening now that we have active cases on is Small Business Administration loan fraud. There's two programs that are out there: the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Fraud Program. Those are big pots of money that we're seeing people try to scam things out of there. They're trying to hit it in two different ways. They're trying to act as middlemen to solicit your information, again, steal PII or proprietary financial information to try and get into your bank accounts and stuff like that if you're a small business. So they're acting as a middleman with fraudulent intentions. The other side of it is that they're filing false claims as borrowers. So we're seeing, working with the Small Business Administration and seeing cases pop up as far as that. Unemployment compensation fraud. This is something we actually have there's a very large case going on right now internationally where there are folks overseas who are exploiting the unemployment compensation funds for various states, filing false claims. And again, to do this, they need your PII. So, they're buying it off of the dark web or from other means, and they're filing false uninsurance compensation claims in your name. And then money mule scams. And I have written there, it's probably too good to be true. If you're not familiar with what a money mule scam is, it is where somebody solicits you to take payment or to cash a check in their name, open a bank account. Basically, you're acting as a money launderer for them. They want to use either your bank account or a joint bank account. They usually ask you to front them some money or ask you just to open an account, let them deposit a big check in there, which is not good at all. They ask you to withdraw some of it, keep some of it yourself. They advertise it as a quick way to make some money for yourselves. And and today with folks that are still out of work, our unemployment claims are still pretty high. It's very easy for somebody to think that this is an easy way to make money, but all it's going to do is get them in trouble. And then we get back to some of the typical things that we were seeing before COVID hit. We still want to make sure, keep everybody aware that ransomware is still running rampant out there. If there's one type of crime that I'm hearing significantly over and over again from all of our field offices and our resident offices and stuff like, and the smaller offices, is that ransomware is not going away. In fact, they're just using COVID as another means to get into your system or to get you to click on something. What I have there are the different tactics that they're still using. Phishing, spear phishing attacks. Sometimes they get into a computer using remote access, brute force, password cracking, people clicking on malicious email attachments. They're getting in through third-party vendor network compromises, and then who you have given access into your systems. Clicking on malicious websites or malicious web advertisements, and all this, to plant that ransomware malware onto your system that locks your system up so that you can't get to your information unless you pay that ransom. And then once you do, they're using multiple tactics so that you can't track them. However, they still are trackable. In fact, that's where the service kind of gets in, kind of makes their expertise in investigating this, is we follow the money. So just because if you've been a victim, don't think that there isn't anything you can do. We've become very good at tracing the Bitcoin wallets and things like that, and trying to get back to those who are actually doing these crimes. Business email compromise that is still ongoing. This is they're using a lot of the same tactics to get in to the systems. And this is where they it's a sophisticated fraud, designed to deceive businesses into sending large sums of money into bank accounts of criminals. They act as somebody who works for your organization, and they send emails out to the folks, the individuals within your organization that control the money, that make the wire transfers, and they craft the emails to sound like things are urgent, that it's coming from the CFO or the CEO or the president. They're using the fact that there's not a lot of in-person contact right now to oversee, and people aren't doing a lot of their due diligence to verify that this is an actual, valid request from the person who's requesting it. So we're still seeing a lot of that that's going on. And again, they're using the fact that COVID is keeping people working remotely. So again, it's something that was here before COVID, and it's going to continue to be around. So what do? We're starting to get back to normalcy now. Like I said before, in some ways. The one thing I can tell you is you need to remain vigilant. There are things that you can do continuously, whether we are in a pandemic or not, that you should always be thinking about. In fact, one of the questions that has already popped up in the question thing is, how effective is multi-factor authentication? Apparently, I have not seen it personally, but apparently somebody has seen that it can be manipulated. Well, multi-factor you should think of as just one tool in your toolbox. You shouldn't rely solely on one form of protection to keep you from being defrauded. It takes a whole cadre, if you will, of things that you can do. So use multi-factor authentication. It is still one of the most effective ways to keep yourself from being defrauded. The folks who might be able to do spoofing of multi-factor authentication are the very sophisticated ones. And again, to date, I have not seen anything of it. So all I can tell you is I would still rely on using it as one of the tools to protect yourselves. You need to make sure that everybody's using caution with email attachments within your organization. Beware of social engineering and phishing. Think of the saying, think before you click. And I'm telling you, I tell you guys here during this power hour, but these are things that you need to communicate within your organization to the folks who aren't on here, and make sure that they are aware of the different ways that they can be manipulated. Education is one of the things that the Secret Service advocates for as a means of protection. When you're out there looking for information, say about COVID-19, only trust legitimate government websites. If somebody sends you a link, for more information purporting to be from the government, don't click on the link. Go just search it through an internet search engine, get to that particular organization, and find the information from there. Don't trust the links that somebody may be sending you. Don't reveal your personal information, your financial information in an email. And don't respond to unsolicited texts or emails. Buyer and user beware. Trust your instincts. Remember, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. Trying to change the slides here. It's locking up. So I'll continue until the slide goes on. So, all right, I'm back, everybody. Apologize for that. Can somebody from Power Hour verify that they can hear me okay?
We can hear you just fine. Thank you.
Apologize for that. Don't know exactly what happened, but I'm back.
It's called the internet. It happens.
All right, I apologize. So we break it down into things that the employee can do, and then we'll talk about things that the organization can do. And just like I just explained, continuous training is needed for all your employees, regardless of what role they play in the organization. Remember, the weakest link is usually the human factor. So teach your employees about malicious attachments and when to recognize social engineering, and give them an outlet to who they can report it to if they think that there is something suspicious going on. You also have to test your employees, make sure that they're fulfilling their obligation in terms of not just freely clicking on everything, and potentially exposing the organization to harm. And again, open lines of communication for them to be able to report when something is potentially going on. And then, when we talk about going back to business email compromise, this is a good one. Make sure that you have adequate protocols in place for all your financial transactions, whether we're in a normal working environment or a pandemic augmented working environment. Don't reveal your financial account information. Make sure that you verify your transfer emails on multi-layers. Make more than one person have to verify it before somebody is able to commit the funds to going. And the thing is, we still have phones. You can't transmit COVID over a phone, so voice confirmations are something that we advocate for. And cultivate an ownership of security with your employees. Reward them when they do good. When you test them, when you do test phishing with them, but you also have to let them know when they fail. I'm not saying public, humiliation, but let them know when the organization does well, and let them know when the organization as a whole needs to improve. And again, just pause before you click. Teach them to exercise some understanding of when they need to take a step back before they click on something. And within the organization itself, you need to provide your employees with the means to be able to do their work and in a safe environment. Give them a reliable, secure VPN solution. Make sure that they are updating and upgrading their devices and on a continual basis as things come out. As people are going back into their work environments and we have concerns. Bring your own device concerns. How long has everybody been out and off the network, as it will, and now you're introducing them back into there, and they're bringing their own devices. What concerns should there be for your organization in making sure that there's nothing on those devices that can be transferred onto the work environment or the work enterprise. Third-party vendor security. Again, this is one of the vulnerabilities I talked about. What do you have in place to make sure that your vendors are taking adequate steps to protect themselves and when they log into your network for whatever business they need to do with you. So, your service level agreements should have some kind of language in there that allows you to make sure that they're doing the necessary upgrades and updates on their particular devices and making sure that they're not exposing your organization to malware that they could be introducing through their own devices. And then again, multi-factor authentication, still one of the most highly effective ways. Complex password requirements. There's many different thoughts and theories on what passwords should be, and how often they should be changed. The one thing that we say is the longer the password, the better. Especially if you're not going to change it on a somewhat frequent basis. Passphrases are really good. Baselining or continued network monitoring. That's something that we tell a lot of our victims, or ask a lot of our victims that we go out on cases as, did you have any kind of a baseline of what was normal network activity for all hours of the day? Are you logging and making sure you're keeping track of those IPs that are trying to gain access and that they're failing? Those are things that could be big red flags that will help the investigator. And it can also help you pre-incident to make sure to see if there's something additional that you need to do, some other protocols to put in place to make sure that and inform your employees, your network employees about what's going on. Backups, again, going back to ransomware now. The single most effective way to survive a ransomware attack is having backups and making sure that your backups don't contain the ransomware that is already affecting your system. So make sure you're scanning those and keeping a clean backup and not reinstalling either the ransomware variant or, if you're being affected by malware, you're not just putting it back on the system. Don't forget to, don't just restore the backup and forget to plug the vulnerability. And then before I start talking about this, I wanted to let you guys know about some of the things in terms of stats that we've been able to collect since COVID kind of started. As far as the Secret Service is concerned, things have been very. We've had some good success in terms of investigating some of these COVID-related fraud schemes. We've initiated over 100 criminal investigations and prevented over $1 billion in fraud losses. Disrupted hundreds of online COVID-19 related scams, halted the alleged illicit sale of COVID-19 test kits, and like I said, we're currently working on a vast international scheme related to the state unemployment insurance claims. So the reason I say that here is because a lot of that is all because of what we have, what we're now calling our cyber fraud task forces. For any of you out there who are familiar with the Secret Service, this all started and was born out of our electronic crimes task forces. Officially last week, we converted our electronic crimes task forces and our financial crime task forces, which were focusing mainly on non-cyber related activity. We combined them last week officially to create what we're calling now cyber fraud task forces. These allow us to basically combine all of our resources together and work more effectively. Nowadays, no matter what kind of fraud we're investigating, it all has some kind of an electronic nexus to it usually. So this allows us to kind of streamline things a little bit more. For you out there who are members of our task forces, it doesn't change anything for you. This is basically just a change in name and structure within the Secret Service. But currently we have 44 CFTFs worldwide, 42 of them here in the United States, and we have 2 international ones. They're born out of trusted partnerships between law enforcement, the private sector, and academia. There's some stats on the figures of partners, total partners. But the big thing is they help us coordinate investigations, whether domestically, across different jurisdictions, even worldwide. Heavy thing that we rely on is information sharing. A lot of what we do and investigate can't be done without the sharing of information. This is also how we push out information of things that we're seeing, alerts, tactics that we're seeing the bad guys use. We also gain technical expertise and pass on technical expertise and training through these CFTFs. So if you're not part of one of our CFTFs, I encourage you to look into it. There's one in virtually every major city in the United States. And then here's some information. There's the contact if you want to look up the nearest field office. They are located in all of our field offices. We have 42 field offices in the United States. And then there's also some additional resources there from some of our department brethren concerning some of the fraud things that I talked about. But with that, I want to thank you. I do have a few minutes to answer a few questions.
All right, quiet. Hey, Matt.
Hi.
I don't know if you heard me say quiet. I was talking to my dog. One of the typical questions we get is, when do the victims call you? Like, in what circumstance? If someone has, a medium-sized business, when do they call the FBI? and when do they call the Secret Service?
That's a great question, and it's one we get almost every time anybody does a speech, because there's a lot of ambiguity out there as to, you know, what organization handles what, and then some people even ask, well, is what I'm talking about or what I've been affected by too small for anybody to really care? What I want to tell everybody today is you shouldn't worry about either one of those factors. If you have something that you want to report, you should call somebody. And what I mean by somebody is call the FBI, call the Secret Service, call your local police department, call your state police agency. You know, a lot of municipalities can't go direct to the federal government. You know, they have police agencies that are affiliated directly with them. So we advocate to call somebody. Let the law enforcement organization that you call figure out who the correct entity that should be handling your particular case. Remember, even if something is happening to a medium-sized organization and they think that, you know, whatever dollar loss they potentially have or what they're being affected by, what fraud scheme, there's no way that they're the only ones that are being affected. So we take a lot of it, you know, how we do these investigations is the sum of all parts. You know, we need information from multiple victims, and law enforcement will then put it together. We will figure out who is the most effective law enforcement agency or the correct law enforcement agency to investigate that. Remember, when I started out even talking today, I explained that, you know, the Bureau, we have very similar jurisdictional authorities, but the Bureau focuses heavily on the nation-state angle of a lot of these network intrusions, ransomware, things like that. We focus on the criminal side primarily. Those that are people are out there to get criminal financial gain. It doesn't mean that the Bureau can't do a case and we can't do a case, but we would never do a nation-state case because that's not in our wheelhouse. We don't have the expertise for that. So if your particular case kind of went down that road, we would make that introduction to the Bureau for you and make sure you're being assisted by that proper law enforcement agency based on the facts of your particular case. And that's how we approach all of them. Don't worry about who you call, just call somebody, because the information is needed to help investigate all of these types of cases.
Absolutely. And when you share that the information for all you out there, it also helps prevent further crime. So It's not just protecting yourself, it's also protecting the future. With that being said, we are just about out of time. Matt, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to maybe having you at one of our live events, perhaps in 2021.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Bradford, and thank you, everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you again. Now we've got a presentation with Cyrus Mistry from Google. So let's give the floor to our friends at Google.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in today to learn more about securing remote workers during this challenging time. My name is Cyrus Mistry, and I'm the Group Product Manager for Chrome Enterprise. In today's session, we're going to start out by talking about the current landscape and how remote working has created new security challenges for IT. We're going to discuss what IT needs in order to create a full stack solution, and we will cover Google's product offerings in this area. Please feel free to ask questions in our live Q&A module, and please remember to fill out the session survey at the end of the presentation. We would love to get your feedback. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. COVID-19 has required organizations to embrace remote working just to keep the lights on. In fact, on March 17th, Gartner ran a study with 800 HR executives to ask about how COVID has impacted their business. They found that 88% of organizations have asked their employees to work remotely. 97% have canceled work-related travel. But most interestingly, only 10% of the organizations plan to reduce work hours. So basically, despite the prevalence of coronavirus, business demands are requiring that work must go on. At the same time that all of that transition is happening, which is enormous in itself, cyber criminals are getting emboldened by this. they're deploying all kinds of new attacks that take advantage of business users. This has created a really, really challenging environment for IT. They are trying to protect corporate data without having physical access to the device, to the user, or to the network. In fact, Gartner reported a new type of attack variant targeting business users with fake coronavirus-related emails. And they're phishing attacks, right? Designed to trick employees into opening attachments. And interestingly, when the user opens these attachments, there's malicious software that can infect the end user device. These have the potential to cause a lot of damage, and we're already starting to see this. This is only one example of what's happening. And the third very interesting thing that's going on at this time, so we've got to move to remote work. We've got this new type of security challenge that we're facing with new types of threats at the same time. And IT departments are being asked to cut costs, right? Which is a remarkable set of things that they have to deal with. And this is across the board. This is because almost every business is facing some type of economic impact from this shutdown. In fact, you can actually see the quote here, right? 70% of organizations are planning to cut costs. But what's interesting is they're planning to cut costs through more effective use of technology. And I think that's where we can come in and help. So what do we mean by full stack approach? Secure remote working requires a full stack approach. It requires thinking about secure endpoints, right? And we're going to cover each of these, by the way. Secure endpoints to harden devices to reduce or almost completely eliminate the risk of malware. User protections to make sure we're handling things like the phishing attack that I just mentioned. Cloud-based management, so a really, really simple, scalable way to manage everything that's out there. And a whole new concept called zero trust access, which is an extremely simple but extremely secure mechanism to have your end users accessing SaaS applications without needing a VPN of any kind. So let's talk about Google and Chrome Enterprise specifically, and let's talk about the full stack. And the areas we're going to talk about are, we're going to talk a little bit about Chromebooks, and I can share with you that I have been on the team as a product manager on Chrome OS for 10 years, more than 10 years actually. And I think I'm now the longest running product manager on Chrome OS. So there's a lot that I can give you some interesting insights into how they work and how they operate. The second thing is talk a little bit about the Chrome Enterprise upgrade, which is the OS Enterprise upgrade features that are there, as well as the scalable cloud-based fleet management that comes with it. Talk a little bit about Chrome Browser Cloud Management, which is a new offering and really exciting to tell you how that works. And then a new feature we called Beyond Corp Remote Access, and what exactly that is and how it can help you. So let's dive in. Let's start with the secure endpoints. This is probably one of my favorite things to talk about, is how Chrome OS is actually built. Chrome OS was built fundamentally very, very differently. It was actually built from the very beginning. We had the luxury, again, of being a late entrant into the OS market. We had the luxury of seeing how all of the other operating systems work and what was so painful about working with them, right? On performance, on security, on managing updates, etc. And so every single layer of the stack, when we were designing it, we thought of a completely novel way to do it that would ensure tremendous levels of security and make it really, really easy to manage, because you don't have to worry about things like antivirus, etc. And so we're going to talk about each of these, which hopefully will be very exciting. The first thing you should know is that all Chromebooks, regardless of the manufacturer model, and there are dozens and dozens of models out there, come with what we call the Titan C security chip. It's built into the hardware of Chrome OS, and it ensures the integrity of the OS and the firmware. It protects users from brute force attacks. It's the security chip that is at the core of many of the Chrome security features, Chromebook security features. You know, it's very interesting. A lot of people don't know this, but every single Chromebook from the hardware layer up has a hardware signature that guarantees the authenticity of that device and ensures that all the way up the stack, we have a root of trust that we can believe in going up to ensure that you are running exactly the operating system we want, that you are running in an unhacked version. You're not in developer mode. You haven't done anything like that. That's a very fundamental thing to Chromebooks. And it's very unique to be able to have that level of vertical integration all the way down, but at the same time have this tremendous ability to pick from all of the top OEMs that are out there. And you can see that when you think about other types of computers out there, you either have a full vertical stack solution, but only one OEM, or you don't get all that vertical integration all the way down to the hardware layer, which means predictability in every single Chromebook that you buy. And so we have kind of got the best of both worlds, tremendous variety, tremendous price availability, but you've also got this phenomenal security guarantee. Also important to note on the Titan C, Google keeps it updated ourselves automatically to ensure that you're always protected from even the most recent threats that we're seeing. Another interesting point that I like to bring up is we call it built-in antivirus, but that doesn't mean that there's antivirus software actually running on the device. It means we've made it so that there's no such thing as an executable hacking into the operating system and running malicious things. And there's a variety of reasons for this. From the very beginning, we decided to make, first of all, we made the operating system read-only, which means you cannot modify the operating system. On other operating systems in the past, you probably will know this, some of you that have been around as long as me, that when you installed an application, it became a super user essentially. It could do all kinds of things. It could change registry settings. In fact, this is why in the old days it was actually when you uninstalled an app, there were still remnants of the app all around. There's no concept of that on a Chromebook. There's no concept of updating or modifying the OS via an app. It is completely read-only. There's a second thing that we do that is also very interesting, where we do something called sandboxing. And those of you that are in security, you'll know what this means, but it means protecting everything and putting a box around it so that everything has to stay within there. Not only is the entire OS to some degree sandboxed like we talk about, but then every single application is sandboxed. The Chrome browser itself is in a sandbox. Every tab within the Chrome browser is in a sandbox. We even have this concept. It was an enormous engineering effort by the security team to do something called site isolation, which takes this notion of sandboxing and takes it one level further to make sure that an untrustworthy website can't get information from other sites. And so sandboxing is very important, and it's a concept in security called defense in depth, which many of you will have heard about, which basically means you have to go through a lot of hoops. You would have to break out of the site, out of the tab, out of Chrome, et cetera, to even get there. And then you would still run up against the wall of you can't really modify the operating system. And then there's this other really neat aspect, which is number 3 on here, that is one of my favorite things, which is we think we're really good at security, right? You can ask security experts about how great Chromebooks are security-wise and why they're loved by government entities and all of that all around. But we're not sure of absolutely everything that we could have possibly missed. And so every single time we boot, right, a Chromebook already boots in 5, 6, 7 seconds, right, very, very quickly. We actually spend time in every boot, in those precious seconds that we force ourselves to be really, really fast at, to verify back from that root of trust that makes sure that every single bit of the operating system is exactly as we intended it. This is a very, very important concept. We were one of the very first to ever do anything like this verified boot. But here's where it gets really interesting. Let's say we find out that something has been tampered with or the operating system isn't exactly what we expected it should be. We alert the user, we don't boot from that, and we actually keep a clean, pristine, segregated operating system on there, and we will actually boot from that. And the user won't even know. And so what's really neat is by having those 2 operating systems, you're always ensured to have one clean operating system that you can revert to if necessary. But that also provides another added benefit, which is because you have 2 operating systems on every Chromebook, if you have modifications like updates that you're getting, right? As you're working, you're happily working, updates are coming down to the operating system. They can happen on the second version. And as soon as it's done, whenever you reboot, we will actually jump you to the new operating system. So the user doesn't even know. In fact, this is a little a little secret I love to tell people, one of my many little tidbits that a lot of people don't realize. When you sign out of a Chromebook and you get back to the login screen, right? You can do that all the time, sign in as a new user, whatever you want, right? Very, very shareable device. If you have a new, if the second version of the operating system is actually updated and is ready to go, when you sign out, we'll actually do a fast, silent reboot and bring you back to the login screen. So you'll be back on the login screen thinking nothing has happened, but you're actually running a completely new version of the operating system. If you compare this to other operating systems that you've probably been on where, please go get some coffee and your lunch and we'll talk to you in 25 minutes as we update your operating system, there is none of that here. No downtime. It's a really, really amazing feature, I think. Now let's talk briefly about user protections. There are several different ways that we make sure that we are protecting users on the web, right? We mentioned the phishing attacks, right? The fake coronavirus themed emails that we mentioned earlier. There's also all kinds of new social engineering tactics, and they're trying to get access to the type of passwords you might have, et cetera. And a lot of times these are not through any fault of the end user. And there's also this concept of data breaches, which is even if you didn't do anything wrong, you had a great secure password, that third-party SaaS provider got hacked and all of the passwords came out. And so these are the types of things that we're going to talk about protecting against. So phishing and malware protection. Google has something called safe browsing, where we literally examine billions of URLs across the web, across the world, to check for unsafe websites. This is by far the largest of any kind. In fact, half of the world's online population is protected by safe browsing, believe it or not. It's just 4 billion devices a day, which is just staggering when you think about it. Now, we do a few things. First of all, if we think that you're about to get to a malicious website, we will alert you and basically effectively stop the user from going there and they'll back out. We do one step further too. We will alert webmasters that their site has been compromised. In fact, we'll notify them through the Search Console. We will detail steps to recover from an infection, and we'll even give them examples of specific code that might have been injected into their site. And now all of that is great, but we went even one step further. We're making this available to the world, right? Google is a very, very open culture. We believe that safe browsing is just something that's very fundamental that the world should have. And so we've made sure that anybody can take advantage of this, which I think is really exciting. There's another really cool thing that we have launched recently, and it is called Password Checkup. So if you guys get a chance, go to passwords.google.com. I'm sure all of you are going now. You can wait a few minutes or make a note of it on the paper next to you to go to passwords.google.com and do something called the password checkup, which is really, really neat. We actually will check for all kinds of things like, hey, by the way, you've used your password multiple places. Or by the way, the passwords that you have used on this website, know that that website has become compromised. So you may want to change that password right away. This is a great example of the types of things that we're trying to do to empower people to make sure that you have very, very secure passwords at all times, right? As much as we hope that the world is going to move towards two-factor authentication and all those great things, this is still, unfortunately, a very big reality of how we get access. Let's talk briefly about cloud-based management. I alluded to that earlier. So managing Chromebooks at scale is super important. We have many now, probably more than a dozen Chromebook customers that have over 100,000 Chromebooks that they manage entirely through admin.google.com. Most of them have not hired a single additional person. We have deployments of over 250,000 Chromebooks, and they just go in here. It's the same if you've got 10, if you've got 50,000, right? Just tremendously scalable. They never need to think about, local servers and syncing databases, and we handle all of that. And I think that's a really, really great feature of having that. In addition, you can manage your Chrome browser, how that works, what extensions you want them to have or what extensions you don't want them to have, and all of that through exactly the same interface. In fact, when you set that up for the Chrome browser, of course, those automatically take effect on the Chromebook, which is also nice. Those are called user policies, right? So certain groups of users may have certain apps that they want, certain progressive web apps, certain Android apps, etc. Of course, we're Google, so search is there. So you don't need to go filtering through pages to find it. You can just go up and say, hey, I'm looking for, a certificate, and it'll jump you right to that section on how to work through all of that. And of course, we have all kinds of really great device reports, what's going on with my OS updates, is my fleet updated, all of those types of things. There's a lot of good reports for you as well. There's a feature that I worked on. Again, one of the benefits of a completely cloud-based scalable system is that with the punch of a button, you can actually completely disable a device, right? So in this remote working world, right, someone says, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, I left my device here, or it got lost, or it got stolen, my house is broken into. It's not a problem, because you can instantly brick the device. And you can even put a custom message up saying, hey, please call this if you find this. This has been a tremendous theft deterrent, actually, because people know if you steal a Chromebook, you're not actually going to get much value from it. It's not going to be able to be used for anything outside, right? And I think that's actually a really, really good thing. The good news is user data already on a Chromebook is 100% encrypted. There is no option to not have it encrypted. And so you're already much safer just by the fact that you're using a Chromebook. But I do like this lost and stolen prevention feature. Of course, you can do things like restricting who can log in. You can have SAML, SSO, you can have two-factor. You can do all of those types of things to make sure that who gets even has the ability to get access to the Chromebook. And you can do all of that directly from the admin console as well. Very, very easy. One of the first things that people set up. This is a new feature, which is pretty exciting, which is you can now, because it used to be you'd restart and reboot your device every morning. I still remember 15 years ago, it might, every night you'd turn it off, and then when you turn it on, you would go for a nice walk because it would take about 20 minutes to boot. You don't have to do that anymore. What's kind of nice is people are just suspending, right? They're closing the lid. But that means that many people are just running on the same operating system for weeks and some for months. And so now there's a new feature where admins can kind of nudge you and say, hey, by the way, if you reboot, you've got a new update. I mean, the nice thing is it is as simple as that. Literally reboot, 6 seconds later, you're running on your brand new operating system. But we wanted to make sure that we notified users of this fact that, hey, please reboot. And now you can take it one step further and you can force them to reboot, because if there's a really important security fix or something that you really, really want to have them have in 83, you can say, look, you've got 7 days or you've got 3 days or whatever you decide that you must reboot this device. And so you can actually forcibly do that, which I think is kind of cool. Now, all of that great stuff I mentioned, you can also now do for the Chrome browser, which I think is also really, really exciting, right? So you can manage your entire set of browsers instead of using, registry and ADMX and SCCM and all of that fun. You can actually do this entirely from the cloud. And that gives you a lot of other really cool advantages, right? There's a really neat feature called the password alert feature, which will make sure that if your corporate employee is trying to use that same corporate password elsewhere on some other website, right? They want that to be their password for some third-party SaaS site. We will literally notify the admin and we will notify the end user, hey, you need to change your password, right? That's not allowed. Also, the other benefit of doing this is you can get all kinds of interesting reports that you couldn't get, right, when you're managing the browser locally. If you do it here, you can get all kinds of reports about the types of extensions that people are using and the applications that they're using. So there's a lot of other cool stuff that you can get. You can manage OS browser updates as well in a much easier way. So there's a lot of these cool things. So I definitely urge you to try this out. It's called Chrome Browser Cloud Management. Do look this up when you get a chance. And now let's talk briefly about zero trust access and what that means. Zero trust access. So traditionally, to get access to websites, there was this concept of we're going to use a VPN. And if you get access to that VPN, you kind of tunnel through and then you kind of get this access to, based on what you're authorized to do, you get access to basically effectively the corporate network. This is, ironically, it sounds super secure. It's very difficult to set up and manage, as you know, and it gives a false sense of security. It's not essentially that much more secure. So believe it or not, what Google has been running for a long time now is something we internally have called Beyond Corp, and now we've made it accessible to the world. To get access to everything we need, we actually don't need a VPN, right? So for me to get access to all the most, detailed internal feature requests or roadmaps or whatever I want, there's no such thing as a VPN, right? we simply use something called Beyond Corp Remote Access, where basically there's this rules engine that's listening and decides, you know what, is the OS the one that you want? You may say, actually, I only want this to be Chromebooks, or I want to make sure that they're running at least on this version. I want to make sure lock screen is set up. I want to make sure device encryption, again, you get that for free on Chromebooks, or I don't trust certain IPs in certain countries, or whatever you may do. But by doing that, there's this real-time decision that's automatically made. It's entirely cloud-based, which is super cool as well. But the end user can be on any network. And that is a really, really powerful thing, right? You're getting more secure by assessing what's really going on at that point. But you're essentially saying, I don't trust anything, so I'm going to look at things very differently. I don't trust the network. I don't trust anything that they're going on. I'm just going to make sure that the traffic's encrypted, that the device says it is, the authentication, that the user is who they say they are. This is also extremely low TCO, right? You're talking about days to set this up versus months, if any of you have ever set up a VPN. Very, very simple pay-as-you-go pricing as well, which I think is really nice. So do look this up as well. There's a lot been written on this. Very, very exciting area. You can see the link right on the screen. So thinking about the full stack now, what we've covered a lot, right? We covered the Chromebooks, why they are kind of have a very different way of handling things as far as malware and virus and phishing. The Chrome Enterprise upgrade, which we showed you in the admin console, the types of things that you can do to manage the enterprise level OS features, the enterprise networking features, and all of the other modes that are on the device, and kiosk managed guest sessions, all of that, who can sign in, shareability. And then we even talked about this Beyond Corp Remote Access. In fact, believe it or not, for Chrome OS, you can actually, and I really love calling this out, you can say you only want access not just to Chromebooks, but you want access only to Chromebooks where we have verified access, meaning where we are sure that this Chromebook is in a pristine state, right? Every single Chromebook, when they're running version X, are all running exactly the same set of bits. It's a very freeing feeling, right, on a Monday morning to have that. So this combination should be super easy to use, really, really secure, and really easy for your end users. And I think that's what makes this a very compelling package. And lastly, you may want to check out our remote work toolkit at the URL on your screen, goo.gle/CE remote work toolkit. There's a lot of great information in there and a lot of what we just covered. And lastly, on behalf of the Chrome Enterprise team here at Google, we want to wish you safety and good health in the coming weeks and beyond. Thank you again for joining us today.
All right, thank you very, very much. To get back on schedule, we're going to bring on Perry. Perry, are you there?
I am. Is my audio good?
Your audio sounds terrific.
Great.
Is with KnowBe4, and you can take it away.
All right. So yeah, let me go ahead, and I'm going to try to speed through this just for the sake of everybody's time. What I really want to get into is some data, and this is really answering some questions that get begged anytime we start to talk about phishing. Let me first back up, give you just a little bit of perspective on me. My name is Perry Carpenter. I'm KnowBe4's Chief Evangelist and Strategy Officer, and what I really focus on is the human element. And so we've heard a couple times already today that humans are one of the primary concerns when it comes to security, because we make these kind of unpredictable decisions, and we kind of want to move around security controls and so on. And so a lot of my career has been focused on trying to deal with this human element and figure out why we do the things that we do, and how to drive more secure behaviors in a very natural feeling way. And then when we need to train people or to coach people, how we do that as effectively as possible. So how do we affect the unconscious piece, and then how do we deal with the conscious piece anytime that we need to have an intervention? I work for a company that really just focuses on those things as its primary goal, is to help employees make smarter security decisions every day. And what I'm here today to talk about is how we answer this question that every executive asks. And the question is really, how do I compare to others? And so let's say you're giving a presentation and you've just run a phishing test in your organization, and you said, well, our click rate with this phishing test is X%. Well, it's all well and good that you know what your click rate is, or what we call your phish prone percentage is. But the second question that follows that is, what does that mean? Or put that in context for me. How do I compare to other organizations that look like me so that I know how I stack up? And that is the primary thing that we're always after, is how good or how bad am I relative to others? And so we're going to talk a little bit about this. I'm going to fly through a few of these points for the sake of time, but I do want to give you some very actionable data that you can review again on your own as you have time to slow down a little bit and think and pore through some of the data elements that I'm going to show you. So number one, why is phishing a problem? I think we know this instinctively, and we've heard this already a few times today, is that phishing is the thing that cyber attackers will rely on. We see this over and over and over again in all the industry reports out there, like the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report, Semantics Threat Report, and so on. It almost always comes back to phishing, even when the secondary way that the organization's being exploited as malware or ransomware or something like that. The vector into the organization is usually phishing. And attackers follow a fairly common pattern that Lockheed Martin codified several years ago of what we call the cyber kill chain. So when you heard earlier on that there are problems where a cyber attacker will look at like breach databases and see email addresses and passwords. Well, that comes in that reconnaissance phase. And so cyber attackers will kind of go and profile an organization, see what's already been exposed about them, what keys they might want to try as they go in, and then they'll weaponize all of that and start to deliver it. That's essentially what phishing is in combination with a number of other attack vectors. But if we can start to deal with some of these problems early within the kill chain, then we make it incrementally or exponentially, I should say, harder for the attacker to be successful. So if we make recon harder and we make weaponization harder, we make delivery harder, and so on. Each one of those steps that we can start to make much more difficult for the attacker, the more likely that they'll just give up and move on to the next target. So here's where the data comes in. I work for a company that supplies a phishing platform that allows you to send simulated phishing emails to your end user and test them in the conditions that would happen in a real cyber attack, where a cyber attacker has sent a phishing email, it bypasses the secure email gateway and all other filtering systems, lands in their inbox, and they're just, unsuspectingly seeing this thing there. If you've got a good, well-trained user, there should be some visceral response. They might not even know why at the very beginning, but they'll have this little red flag in the back of their mind that says, I don't trust this. And then they'll start to investigate. Or even if they can't really put their finger on why it feels wrong, they'll go ahead and submit that for somebody else within IT to look at to let them know if that's safe. An untrained user that's unprepared, that is just going through their email, is much more likely to see the email, go ahead and open it up, read through it, and if there's an action that's being requested, like click on a link or enter your password, they're much more likely just to do that so that they can process through their email and get on with their day. So this phishing benchmark by industry is going through kind of the differences between an untrained, unprepared user in different segments of their journey of awareness versus a trained user in their journey. So what we did is we took, and we have a lot of data since we're the world's largest provider of services within the space. We took a large data set and looked through that and segmented that off and wanted to look at that user's journey across these different 19 different industries and these 3 different chunks of organization sizes, from 1 to 249, 250 to 999, and 1,000 plus. And so what that does is it gives you a couple different ways to look at the data. You can look at the global aggregate data of everything. You can look at your industry and then your specific size range, or you can just look at all industries with size range, or you can mix those up. And then ultimately what we're hoping to do is to give you some insights, again, to answer that other question of how do I look compared to others? We did this across 3 phases. One was just to look at, untrained, unprepared users that had never been given a phishing simulation before, and wanted to know what their baseline phish-prone percentage is. Then we wanted to look at a phase 2, which is roughly 90 days later after they have received some training and at least another phishing test. And then phase 3 is a year later, where they've been receiving a combination of training and phishing tests, where those tests have been happening at least once a month. And then ultimately what we're testing for, and the hypothesis behind all of this, is the more training someone receives, the better their phishing muscle memory becomes, or their resilience to phishing becomes. Because I really do see this like training. If you want to improve anything when it comes to sports or athleticism or strength or even mental acuity, the things that help with that are repetition. If I want to build strength, I have to go to the gym more than once a year. If I want to get better at a sport, I have to go up and I have to practice. I don't just pick up a basketball or a soccer ball and then have some kind of professional level acuity. I have to commit to the practice. And that's what this gets to, because we want to build secure reflexes. We want to build proper strength. And at all times, my contention is that we are either building strength or we are allowing atrophy. And so this is what's testing for that. And at the very beginning, this baseline, things look pretty bad. These are some of the top, and by that I mean the worst examples that you'll see with this baseline of unprepared, untrained users. Small business, 44.7% phish-prone percentage. For healthcare, medium, you see the worst there was construction at 49.7%, large enterprise technology organizations at 55.9%, which, I mean, when you think about what just happened with Twitter the other day, you can start to see how sometimes the technology side of things, it's kind of like the mechanic's house, where it's their car that's always having problems, or usually the mechanic's spouse's car that's always having problems. Sometimes the organizations that specialize in these things have the worst practices internally, because they're focused on everything and everybody else. So what we'll see is, hopefully, if the theory is right, and when we apply training and when we apply some kind of repetitive work on this, that we'll see substantial improvement. Well, here's the baseline for everybody. And I realize that some of this print is kind of small on a few of your screens, so I'll take just a minute to let you find yourself here. But what this is essentially saying is, if you have an untrained, unprepared user and a phishing email lands in their inbox, that across your organization, this is the number of people or the percent likelihood that you would have a bad day associated with that. And this is data that has been proven several different ways, and we could always go through the math behind how this has been proven. But this is extremely accurate, granular data that we've tested several different ways at this point. And so go ahead and find your industry there, find your size, and you'll see what you would expect if you're not doing any training. How many people within your organization, what's the percentage that would fall for something at any given time? So then we go forward, and let's say now you've implemented a program, and I don't care whose program that is, whether that's our program at KnowBe4 or whether that's a competitor. The idea here, though, is that you're implementing some kind of phishing training and you've done some kind of education. So now you've prepared the mind of your user and you're starting to prepare some repetitive strength training, essentially. So within 3 months, you get that down essentially by half, 14.1%. I mean, that's not a bad return for 3 months worth of fairly minimal investment in time and resource. And again, I'll give you just a second to go ahead and find your industry and your size, and you can look at the overall numbers, and you can also narrow in on yours. And then we've got some insights here as well. The most dramatic reduction that we saw was in those 1,000+ organizations where a technology organization had a 39% decrease over that 90 days. So that's pretty significant. You'll also see significant drops in manufacturing, in healthcare and pharma, and in education. And by the way, we just ran a test or a series of studies across what we call security culture, and that measures 7 dimensions from the way that people think about culture and security to the way that they take responsibility and so on. And education, unfortunately, continued to rank at the bottom of the list. It was a very neglected vertical when it comes to security. And so if you're thinking practically of how do I improve resilience, well, then phishing training can come in as one of those things that in an unfortunately neglected industry that is struggling when it comes to security practice, you can start to build some good reflexes relatively quickly. And then you'll also see significant drops in this area when we move forward and look at the 1 year. Now, 1 year plus, this is where things get really, really cool, right? Because now you've seen us go from nearly 40% phish-prone percentage at the very beginning down to under 5%. And that's a huge, hugely significant reduction. Again, I'll give you just a second to find your vertical and your size, see what you would expect with that as well. And I think that the results speak for themselves. When you focus on a best practices program, and again, I don't care whose platform you're using. This is not necessarily a vendor-specific thing, though I believe we have the best product on the planet when it comes to this. But the results speak for the practice and the commitment to doing it right. So the combination of intellectual-based education, which is what we've always done as an industry, but then putting very practical measures and repetitive practice with that, with allowing people to fail safely in an environment that will support them and help them improve. And that's another key factor here is you're not letting people click and quote unquote fail so that you can punish them or shame them or anything else. When somebody clicks, you want to find ways to support them and help them make better choices later on rather than shaming them and creating an alienation between the employee population and the security team. And so you do have to manage this culture aspect and the mindset aspect extremely proactively. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for some heartache. And we could have a whole session just on best practices for how to run that, but that's outside of the scope of this right now. The key takeaway, though, is that when you work on a behavior-based program, you will see improvement. So when you look at those industries that I showed early on, and then you look at 12 months later, what you'll see overall is that there was a significant improvement, 88% improvement after 12 months. That's significant improvement, significant ROI. And then when you look at the kind of the full range, you see an overall aggregate of around 87%. And again, you can find your industry there. But overall, I mean, this shows what we've known since we were kids. When we practice something, when we're consistent with something, when we're diligent with something, we will improve. And that's the key takeaway, is that security awareness is not a one-time October-based event. Security awareness has to be something that's active and something that's ongoing. Otherwise, it's really just plain lip service to the concept of security awareness. Just for completeness, or give you some perspective around the world, I'll show you some world-based numbers. These are a little bit less granular, and this is a different data pull, so the numbers don't line up exactly with the other data. And there's several reasons that I won't get into in this, that we had to segregate this data in different ways. But what I would say is that where the raw percentage numbers are different than what you saw in the other study, the key thing to focus on here is the percentage of change between the baseline 90% and 1 year, because the ratios that you'll see in that percent change are the same. So regardless of how you crunch the initial numbers, what this shows is that when you put the program in place and you run that baseline, you look at it over 90 days, and then at the year period, you'll still see that baseline, cut it in half, and then down to a significant amount at the very end. And that's the important takeaway from these global slides as well. Some of these we just didn't have all the data that we needed yet at the time, but I thought provided some really interesting perspective. So here in Africa, average fish-borne percentage 29.2 after 90 days. Not quite the dip we would expect, but still significant, 21.8, and then over a year, that consistency really pays off. We're here in UK and Ireland, 26.7% down to 13%. That's right in range with the way that we would have predicted it. And then down to 4.7, again, right in the range that we would have predicted based on the more global or the wider data pool that we had. Over here in Europe, 29.5 to 15.3, again, right, at the range that we would have expected. And then I didn't have enough good yearly data yet because that data set was too small. So hopefully next year, this time, I'll have a really good wide data set that I can share there that will also have the year number in it. But rather than just plug something in, I would rather just leave it blank for the sake of the integrity of the data. All right, and then over here in APAC, Asia Pacific region, 29.1 down to 17, again, right in that range that we've been seeing in the other slides. Not quite the full dip under 5% that we've seen in most others, but 6.2. That's still a really good, significant story. There's some good reasons that might not have gone down all the way. One, here, if you look at the 1,000 plus area, we didn't have enough data there yet. So again, this is a smaller data set, and so fluctuations within any number causes a significant pull one way or the other. I would assume that next year, this time as well, when we have that data set more fully fleshed out, that the data will fall in line with the patterns that we've seen elsewhere. All right, so with the last couple minutes that I have, and I'm going to try to blow through this in 5 minutes, so we'll see if we have time for some questions. How do you create your human firewall? The first is to notice that people are the critical fabric here. We've kind of hammered that point home, so I'm not going to belabor that. The thing that I will belabor for a second is to say, if you're running a traditional security awareness program that's information-based only, you're doing it wrong. And I don't mean to shame anybody there, but what I will say is that a traditional program falls or fails to account for what I call the knowledge intention behavior gap. And I wrote a whole book that explores all this called Transformational Security Awareness. So if you're wanting to dive deep into that, go ahead and pick up the book, and it will take you deeper than you ever wanted to go into how this works and how to fix it. But really, it's when somebody has knowledge, they don't necessarily act on it. We don't always care about it. And even when we have the intention to act on the knowledge that we have, we've often failed to do so. And so there's a gap between knowledge and intention, and there's a gap between intention and behavior. And so we have to account for that in the way that our programs are built. That also leads to what I call the 3 realities of security awareness. And you'll see them right here. Just because I'm aware doesn't mean that I care. If we try to work against human nature, we will fail. And what our employees do is way more important than what they know. And I'll restate this 3rd one fairly explicitly. What somebody has known has never stopped a breach. It's only what somebody does that either prevents a breach or allows a breach to occur. It's always the action component that is what matters. And you can do the right thing with the right knowledge, but you can also do the wrong thing with the right knowledge, and then vice versa. You can do the right thing regardless of whether you know why you did it. And so focusing on this behavior aspect is something that we've neglected for a long time, but when you put in some intentionality behind that, you can reap a huge amount of security-related rewards. And we could go through that in detail later, but we don't have time to get bogged down there today. I'll go ahead and skip through some of these because I do know that we're running short on time. Here's the way that I'll end this, though, is when we think about security awareness, we really have to approach this from a marketing mindset where we send out deliverables over periods of time. We're constantly reinforcing the message through different communication channels, through different communication mediums, so that people are being challenged, visually, and through different ways of engagement, like videos or learning modules or posters or executive videos or in-person meetings and so on. So it's always reinforcing that message. But then you're constantly, throughout this, as often as you can, doing these simulations that put somebody in the real world environment where they have to make the security related decision. And simulated phishing is the prime example for this. That's the one that I think the industry is doing a really good job with right now, and is very solid, has good metrics behind it, and then you can expand from there. So with that, I am going to go ahead and I've already hammered these, so I'm going to go ahead and just stop for the sake of time and see if there's a question or two that we want to take.
Hey, how are you? Thanks, Ray. That was a tremendous amount of information. And of course, a couple of the delegates have already asked, can we make some of these or all of these slides available?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. So for those that are listening, we've got over 200 that are still with us. We are going to put these up in approximately 2 days on Cyber Summit USA. And I did believe we have another question. What is the frequency for testing? Is there a time frame that you would give as advice to companies of how many times to test the staff?
Yeah. There's no perfect answer for this.
Sure.
But my answer is always as often as your corporate culture will allow you to do it. So the minimum from my perspective should be at least once every 30 days.
Wow.
I do hear of companies that only test once a year or once a quarter, and I say that's not really training. That's taking a metric.
Right.
It doesn't improve anything. It just shows you how bad you are. It's kind of like going to the gym once a year and you leave the next, and for the next week you feel horrible. That's what phishing testing once a year gets you, or once a quarter gets you. If you want the improvement and want to create change, then you do it more frequently.
Sure. That's like my gym workout. Once every couple of weeks, and I feel terrible.
Yeah.
Hey, Terry, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to bring on a DHS immediately.
Thank you so much.
And we'll see you soon. All the best. Okay, Benjamin, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Bradford. How are you?
I'm doing great. We will just roll right into your final presentation, and it is all yours.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Well, just about it on the top of the hour, everyone. Thanks for hanging in there. I know we don't have a lot of time left, so I'm going to try to speed through as much as I can and probably just really hit on some of the key points to this. My name is Ben Gilbert. I'm a cybersecurity advisor with the Department of Homeland Security's newest agency on the block, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. We are, as I mentioned earlier, basically the newest federal agency. The President signed off on legislation back in November 2018, formed us as that first, really the only agency that's looking across all, the risk landscape across the nation. Our mission is quite simply to lead the national effort to understand and manage the risk to our critical infrastructure. That includes cyber risk as well as physical and kind of the connect risks associated with that. Essentially, we are looked upon as the nation's risk advisor. Our motto down there, defend today, secure tomorrow. So we are defending against the various threats that our country faces today while working with all levels of government, private sector, and academia, public and private sector, to help safeguard and secure our critical infrastructure against the threats of tomorrow. So as I mentioned, we are looked upon as the nation's risk advisor. We could do more to advance the national risk management agenda than any other single place in the U.S. government right now. We've taken all hazards approach, looking across the risk landscape to include risk areas such as insider threat, acts of terrorism, accidents, systemic technical failures, and so forth, to include extreme weather, risk of pandemics, to include the pandemic we're currently under right now in COVID-19, and also risk of significant cyber attacks. Particularly when it comes to the risk of significant cyber attacks and cyber risk in general. Under COVID-19, it's important to understand that critical infrastructure, whether you're with financial services, law enforcement, healthcare providers, retail, virtually any other industry out there, right now, we are currently at an increased risk posture of a cyber attack. So why is this? Well, during COVID-19, many of our critical infrastructure organizations, many of us have been forced to move our operations in an online and remote working environment. Doing so adds new technology and added complexity to that operating environment, which ultimately increases the attack surface. And threat actors know this. Moving toward a remote working and operating environment also means those organizations are now more reliant on that technology. So widespread disruptions due to technology failures and disruptions also means a greater impact to operations. Something also worth noting here, your IT personnel are obviously more likely working remotely as well, which adds complexity to and adds time associated with any type of incident response efforts, and which also creates a greater impact to those operations if there is any type of disruption. Threat actors know this. And if you're familiar at all with risk management principles, what I basically just described to you is the basic equation of risk. Probability times impact equates to risk. When both increase, such as in our current environment, so does risk. So I'm just going to kind of skim through this real quick. This is Special Agent Severo touched on a lot of this early on in the session. But basically, just understand that with the current cyber threats that are out there, threat actors are very attentive to real-world situations, and they will specifically focus their efforts, accordingly, and according to, specific scenarios and circumstances that are out there, considering our COVID-19 environment there are very specific phishing email activity related to COVID and coronavirus. There is an increased coronavirus-related cyber attacks, particularly with healthcare manufacturing. The research agencies and organizations that are out there, the FBI and CISA, have recently pushed out public service announcements on this. You can certainly find it on both the FBI's website and CISA's website. CISA and UK's National Cybersecurity Center also pushed out a joint alert back in April, specifically related to APT actors or advanced persistent threat actors targeting our health and research companies. So it is worth noting that. Just gleaning through this as well, I think a lot of folks in here are somewhat familiar with some of these the risks and threats that we face today, and this has been kind of gleaned through, talked through earlier as well. Specifically with ransomware, understand that there is different ransomware variants that are out there. Just more broadly speaking across the threat landscape, the threats that we see today are creating and causing operational impacts. Ransomware is a perfect example of this. These particular variants that are out there are specifically targeting various organizations and industries that are out there. Rebel, Sotonokibi, targeting managed service providers and cloud-based environments. Ryuk, if you're familiar with that, that particular variant is targeting a lot of those organizations out in the medical industry, as well as our education subsectors and pretty much any state, local government entity out there. That particular variant in itself has become very disruptive to a lot of our local government entities that, quite frankly, are not resourced to deal with cyber attacks. And so it creates a true operational impact for them. Case in point, if you're familiar with I'd say the more high-profile ransomware attack that hit Baltimore about a little over a year or so ago. That's a clear example of more of a high-profile example of how these ransomware threats can actually create an operational impact. There are more specific malware types that are out there that target our industrial control systems environments and our operational technology environments. Those organizations such as water treatment facilities, power plants, oil refineries, you name manufacturing facilities when it comes to dealing with specific industrial control systems, specific equipment that controls valves, actuators, pumps, and so forth, the actual mechanical devices. There are specific malware threats that are out there that target some of those devices, in particular what we call safety instrumented systems. There are also threats that are targeting external dependencies that are out there. Case in point, Rebel, Sotonokibi, targeting the ransomware variant, targeting your managed service providers and cloud-based operating environments. So if you're an organization that's reliant on cloud-based operations, just understand that there are threats that are out there that target those types of operating environments. So if they have an operational impact due to ransomware or any type of other cyber incidents that's out there, how are you as an organization going to react to that? And how are you as an organization making sure that your operations are sustained when your third-party vendors or your external dependencies are actually the ones experiencing that cyber disruption? And then lastly, on a point on here, emerging technologies, when we're talking about things like 5G, autonomous vehicles, just understand that, that is creating new opportunities for threat actors out there and expanding the attack surface greatly. So it's just another threat, just another vector, so to speak, to pay attention to, and it is something worthwhile pointing out. And okay, so again, a lot of the COVID-related, discussion has been discussed already. Just understand, and I'm going to glean through this real quickly. Just understand that, CISA is kind of being that nation's risk advisor. We are working very closely with Department of Health and Human Services and CDC on pushing out all sorts of types of information related to COVID, guidance on your essential workforce for your organization, what that means, reopening strategies. CDC has pushed out a pretty nice flow chart, so to speak, on, it's kind of like a one-pager flow chart, very quick and easy to read, very digestible flow chart that allows any organization to understand what are the things they should be thinking about when preparing to fully reopen under COVID-19, and how prepared you are as an organization, and should you actually reopen. Again, don't have a lot of time for this, but we'll just go through this quickly. Understand that there are some quick and easy protective measures that every organization should be thinking about right now. If you don't already have these in place, you really should be thinking about fully implementing these various protective measures. These are I'd say the low-hanging fruit essentials that organizations should be thinking about. Having an inventory of all of your IT, information technology, and separating that out, technology as well as your information assets. Having a full-fledged inventory of that. You can't protect what you don't know you have. So it's really important to have that inventory. Also prioritize that inventory according to how critical they are to your operations as a whole. That helps you identify your high-value assets within your organization. Deploying various antivirus on servers and workstations. I think everybody knows that, but again, got to foot stomp it, because time and time again, as we go out and work with organizations, we see there are some, workstations that maybe the organization didn't know they had, that have outdated or maybe don't have any type of antivirus protection on it at all. Turning on logging for all network appliances, services, and servers. This is one of those that I think information security professionals know they should be doing, but for whatever reason, it's a bit harder to implement. But again, foot stomping some of these basic best practices and essentials, so to speak. Backing up to known, secure, and well-tested accessible solutions. If you have your backup server and your NAS storage in the room next door or on the same network, same flat network as everybody else, that may be convenient, but it really doesn't help you in widespread impacts to your operations, especially when you're dealing with a threat such as a ransomware attack, which generally speaking, ransomware that's out there, generally the first places they're going to look to deploy that ransomware malware is your backup systems. So ensure that they're well-tested, known, accessible solutions that are out there that are off your normal networks. Implementing patch management practices, finding some sort of way to implement patches in a timely, repeatable manner. Truth be told, the zero-day attacks that are out there, oftentimes organizations jump to patch those as quickly as possible. But the reality is most threat actors don't go after those. Most threat actors go after the systems that have known vulnerabilities that have not been patched. So really important to, patch, making sure you have the latest updates so that those vulnerabilities are plugged. And then lastly, implementing strong user management practices, things such as two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, least privilege practices, can't be overstated, the importance of those various best practices. There's more longer-term practices organizations should be thinking about, such as, having a plan in place for your incident response efforts. Knowing who to contact when you're dealing with a cyber incident, that includes internally as well as externally. If you're dealing with a cyber attack such as ransomware, you really want to report that not just through your channels internally, but you want to report that externally through known, trusted sources that could assist with that, as well as help provide that situational awareness, either through the FBI or through CISA. Just really important to have that incident response plan in place and know how to respond properly to incidents. Develop and strengthen situational awareness across the organization. Implement innovative security awareness training. Time and time again, I have gone out to organizations and they say, yeah, we have an incident, we have a security awareness training program. It's handled annually. But if it, and maybe this is a foot in my mouth on how the federal government handles their security awareness training. But if it's anything like, DHS's annual security awareness training, I could tell you there is there's a lot to be desired on how to improve that training. It's often looked upon with organizations as a check the box compliance metric, not so much a useful tool to make sure that your end users are properly prepared. So, think of ways to innovate and build your security awareness training to help prepare your end users on how to understand what types of threats that are out there and how to respond appropriately. Utilizing attack frameworks, the previous speaker mentioned, cyber kill chain through Lockheed Martin. That's a great example of, utilizing some sort of cyber attack framework. When you're dealing with a cyber attack, it's important to understand where you can, at what points can you deploy mitigating measures during what stages of a cyber attack. And that's very helpful and very useful to that. Lastly, conduct internal audits and periodic cyber assessments. Cyber assessments, apart from your periodic, your internal audits, cyber assessments look for gaps in your process and gaps in your security posture, and help you to understand how to plug those gaps down the road. So really important to understand that. Lastly, organizational leaders, know your business risks and know and treat cyber as a business risk. Organizational leaders should be, your C-suite folks should be focusing on building a culture of operational resilience and cyber readiness in your organization. It starts from the top. If your top level management is not focused and on this and the cyber threats that are out there, then that is going to reflect within the rest of the culture or within the rest of the organization's culture. So foster that culture of operational resilience and cyber readiness. Bake cybersecurity as a part of your risk management strategy and your business strategies, to include building those into and baking those into your contracts that you in third party and your external relationships. Build that network of trusted relationships and sector partners that are out there, again, including your government agencies. Build those relationships with those government agencies, both local, state, and federal levels. And lastly, everyone should be participating in cyber awareness training. Everyone should know the backup solutions available to them, and everyone should be vigilant, accountable, and be report incidents and suspicious activity immediately. Okay, and let's see, let me zoom back. Okay, hit the wrong button there. This is just a snapshot of many of the no-cost cybersecurity services that CISA has to offer from various, we have 9 different cybersecurity assessments. All of these are no-cost and voluntary resources that are available out there. We have various training and exercise programs that are available. We have a cyber exercise playbook, cybersecurity training through our federal virtual training environment, vulnerability notes database. Please, I can't touch on a lot of these in detail, obviously, in running out of time here. Just know that there is a lot of resources available. Please come out and check our website at cisa.gov. We also have a response assistance capability, and I'll talk about that in just briefly a little bit in just a minute here. My role is a cybersecurity advisor. I'm one of 24 that are out there deployed across the country. We have a regional presence across the country. My sole role is to work with owners and operators both in the public and private sector arenas and act as that advisory CISO to them, introducing them to various resources that CISA has to offer, no-cost resources, working with them to understand their cybersecurity posture, and ultimately help them increase their cybersecurity and risk management capabilities in those organizations. We are essentially the boots on the ground, face-to-face touch point of CISA and working with owners and operators directly, as well as kind of providing outreach through venues such as this. There's a map, how we're deployed. This is a brief listing of some of the different cybersecurity assessments we have to offer, from the top, very strategic, such as the Cyber Resilience Review, across how your organization manages cyber risks, as well as the operational processes and practices carried out in your organization to help to manage those risks. It's really looking at the maturity of those processes and practices and the repeatability of those to help ensure that you are as operationally resilient as you can be when it comes to dealing with cyber incidents and cyber risk management practices that are out there. And we offer 8 other assessments ranging from very strategic to very technical. Probably the most technical is pen tests that we have to offer, both remote pen testing as well as on-site pen testing capability at the bottom there. I will say that these are all offered, again, no cost to organizations. There are different time requirements associated with this, so it is worth noting. If you're interested in any of these resources, please reach out to me directly. I could assist with that. And lastly, just to briefly touch on the federal government's response to deal with cyber incidents at the 100,000 foot level. Just understand that when there is a significant cyber incident that occurs, the FBI has a lane through the Department of Justice as part of the threat responder to that cyber incident. So they are coming in as that primary investigator and that law enforcement entity. They're treating it as a crime and going after the perpetrator for that purpose. And so they're looking for attribution and so forth. They're going to help organizations to go after the perpetrator and treat that as a crime itself. CISA, through Department of Homeland Security, we are the asset responder to a significant cyber incident. So we are working directly with that organization to help them triage and remediate and recover from that cyber incident. So we could even deploy resources on site in exigent circumstances to help them walk through how to properly respond and recover from that cyber incident. And lastly, we have an intelligence apparatus through the intelligence community that is supporting both the FBI and CISA's efforts in the background and helping with those efforts. CISA does have a central cybersecurity center. We call it CISA Central. For those folks who are somewhat familiar with CISA and DHS's cyber operations, this is the artist formerly, what I call the artist formerly known as the NCIC, National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center. They are now known as CISA Central. They are our premier incident response focal point and our touch point. Within their operations, it's basically a 24-hour SOC with what used to be known as U.S. CERT operators on the watch floor, as well as folks from various information sharing analysis centers, LNOs with the different intelligence communities, and so forth, as well as our threat hunting and incident response folks on the watch floor, working day in and day out, working with state, local, and federal government and private sector owners and operators to understand the cyber threat landscape that is out there and sharing that threat intelligence across those entities, as well as providing that incident response efforts. So I got a quick question here. How does the watch floor compare with MSISEC SOC? DHS funds MSISEC, and MSISEC has an LNO on the watch floor. MSISEC focuses their efforts explicitly with state and local government. CISA Central is really, I'd say, all hazards across all 16 critical infrastructure sectors, as well as state and local government and federal government entities. We've worked very closely with MSISAC on that, and I would say, to the difference, MSISAC is really focused on state and local governments. CISA Central is focused much more broadly on that. And with that said, just know that we have a 800 hotline. You can reach out to us at CISA's, our email address here, or please, again, can't emphasize this enough, visit our CISA.gov website. There's a lot more information on a lot of this that is out there and that we unfortunately don't have a lot of time to dig into, but also includes things like CISA Insights, our Cyber Essentials, and much more details on our cybersecurity assessments. That said, let me see if I could run through any quick questions before I turn it back over to Bradford.
Hey, how are you, Benjamin? Of course, the constant question is, since we did run through these slides rather quickly, will we be able to share this set of slides in a few days? Or a cleansed version of them?
So I provided Nancy, I think, with a shareable version of this.
Great.
Certainly feel free to share that out. And again, please, if anybody's got questions, please feel free to reach out to me directly. There's my email address right there as well.
Terrific. Benjamin, thank you so much. I think at this point we are good. And thank you again for your service to our country. And what a great job you guys have been doing. It's wonderful that, and I'm glad you put this through, this major point. This has already been funded by taxpayers. So the tools here are complementary to any business owner out there, correct?
Absolutely. Thank you again, Richard.
You got it. Take care. All right, folks, thank you so much for joining us for our final Power Hour for the DC region. I'd like to thank all of our speakers, of course. And again, we are having a full-day cybersecurity summit on July 28th. Over 1,300 executives have already RSVP'd for that event. And again, that is going to be July 28th. You can find out those details on who the speakers are and what the agenda is just by visiting cybersummitusa.com. Thank you so much again for joining us, and we will see you at the next Power Hour, hopefully the next Cybersecurity Summit. And hopefully we will see you live when we get back to doing in-person events in 2021. All right, that is basically it, and thank you to my team and to all of you for joining us. Take care. Stay safe and stay healthy.
We created IoT Nation to help professionals like you navigate the IoT space, to find the companies, people, use cases, and events that are most relevant for you. On IoT Nation, you can browse over 25,000 IoT-related companies and dive into the details for specific ones. You can also search geographically, zoom into any area of the map, and explore companies in any city. You can find applications in various verticals, such as smart buildings, smart cities, connected mobility, and many more. And you can plan your week and month ahead by searching dozens of online and offline events to find the ones that are most relevant for you. For all Cyber Summit Power Hour attendees, we are offering free use of IoT Nation Pro for 30 days with the code CYBER2020V. If you have any questions, contact us at info@iotnation.com.